Hello everybody and welcome back to episode 2 of the LVFR A32x tutorial series for Microsoft Flight Simulator, continuing straight from where we've left off on episode 1. We're going to be working into pushback, engine start, all the way through to takeoff and climb. Lots to fit in. Hope you're enjoying the series so far. Let's crack on with episode 2. So while the ground crew are under the aeroplane, inserting the ground pin and all the rest of it, we can look up in the overhead panel and turn the beacon light on. That's the anti-collision light telling everybody around the aeroplane that we're about to move. Depending on what you're using for your charts, you need to have a little look at them for a moment and plan your pushback. So we're at Pier A here at Terminal 3 Manchester. We're going to push and start, and we want the nose to go right and the tail to go left on Juliet Foxtrot to face where that Bravo, that letter B, is there on the charts. And that's because we're going to taxi out of Bravo, left on Juliet, all the way through to the runway hold points, runway 23 right. With a product like GSX, you get really good pushback features which allow you to be nice and accurate, but otherwise you just try your best.
Release parking brakes, please.
When we're ready, we're going to begin to push back. So, as the dispatch has just asked, we're going to release our parking brake. Before we do, we're going to look back
Release parking brakes, please.
and we're going to shut the flight deck door. Now we can press our keybind to toggle the park brake off, and we're ready to push back and start the engine. So, while the ground crew is doing its thing, we're going to look down. Where it says engine 1 and engine 2, we've got a mode control switch here. We're going to flick it right to ignition mode start, and we can then see we've got power to the FADEX for the engine start here. So we now have lower and upper displays showing engine status. Engine 2, we're going to start first. So we're going to flick the lever up, and then we're going to watch the displays on both screens. Initially N2 is going to rise. There it goes. We should see a rise in the degrees Celsius and the PSI in a short moment. And with that as well, the M1 will begin to rise and the EGT will begin to rise as well. And as you can see, we now have a fuel flow in the engine. Once it's ready, the engines will show stable.
Cockpit to ground.
We can hear the PTU in the background.
You can disconnect.
Engine 1 can start, so we'll repeat the same process with engine 1, and we'll wait till they're both stable, showing roughly the same figures on both screens. Everything's in the right position. Once both engines are on and stabilised, we need to think about configuring for takeoff and taxi. So we're going to take off flaps 1 plus F for today's flight, and that's going to be our takeoff flap setting. And we've already discussed the taxi route down between Bravo on to Juliet to the hold point for the runway. So we've already discussed our taxi route today. Juliet Foxtrot, down onto Bravo, left on Juliet. And we have two options now, similar to other airports. We could do something called an intersection departure, and that is where you line up at Mike instead of Juliet because you don't need the full length of the runway, and that's something quite typical with a flight like this in nature. Certainly from London Heathrow, the shuttle service going up to Manchester will use an intersection departure and will cut the runway short by quite a few hundred metres, and it allows them to fit in more aeroplanes basically and have a slightly more efficient airport operation. So we're going to taxi to Mike 1 and line up via Mike. If the runway wasn't that long, then we would use the full length. Dispatch has moved away, engines are both good, so we're going to go back down to the engine ignition mode selector, change that back to norm, and then we're going to select the flap lever to 1. We need to pull the ground spoilers up to the arm position. And then from there, having a little look at the displays, auto brake max, And that is the final step now for our pre-takeoff checks. We have no blue warnings or no blue messages on the display there. Looking up to the overhead panel, we can turn the taxi lights on, so it's one click for the nose light. And we can turn the APU off. So APU bleed off, master switch off, and the APU will shut itself down. Quick check of the overhead panel, no white lights. If there's a white light and an Airbus, usually it means something is off. Clear left and right, and we can turn the parking brake off. A little bit of power. To get us to start moving. And we're going to taxi all the way to that hold point for the runway and talk about takeoff. While we're taxiing out, we need to do control surface checks. So we can have a look at the lower display, and we want to go all the way left on the stick. We can see there that we've got the left ailerons and the speed brakes deflected up, back to neutral, all the way right on the stick. Same happens but for the right ailerons, back to neutral, and we look at the elevator indications. We're going to pull back on the stick, we can see the arrows go right to the top, back to neutral, and then all the way forwards, back to neutral. Rudder pedals, certainly in Microsoft Flight Simulator, initially start overly sensitive. They need a little bit of a wiggle. So for that, use a bit of brakes, reduce your speed right down, and then press the rudder pedals a number of times to get full motion out of it. You can do that when you're stationary as well if you want, to make things a little easier. And if you find at any point you get a blue message, certainly Auto Brake Max might reset itself, just press it again every time you notice it. We'll do one final check of that prior to takeoff. For takeoff today then, we're going to do something called managed mode for the climb. And that is, as we saw in the charts earlier on, making sure the aeroplane will respect the constraints of the departure route today up to 5,000 feet and then not climb above that. Once we're level at 5,000, we'll then discuss further climbs using an open climb mode instead, a slightly different mode. And the difference between the two are whether or not you push up or down on the knobs. Same for heading mode and same for speed mode. If you see a white circle near each of them, it means that it is in managed mode. So here's the whole point, runway 23 right. ECAM memos, no blue. Performance is set. Make sure our trimmable horizontal stabilizer is set. Rudder trim is showing 0.0 and the transponder is now on and alt reporting is on. Up on the overhead panel, we're going to put the nose light to take off, landing lights on, strobe lights 2 clicks on, and runway turn off lights on. And that's all of our lighting now set for takeoff as well. Remember, after takeoff, around about 1,000 foot above ground level, the nose is going to level off a little bit. The aeroplane's going to begin to accelerate. We'll be looking for an indication on the aeroplane when to move our throttles into the climb gate, because there are different detents on the Airbus which actually keep things really simple. As we line up, look into the approach path, make sure nothing is in the way. Nothing on final approach, and always look for the windsock, because it will tell you what the weather is doing. Nearest windsock is just to the left behind the Pappies, and we can see the wind is coming towards us slightly, basically across the runway from that direction. Thankfully in this, because it's an Airbus, we don't have to turn the ailerons into wind or anything like that. The fly-by-wire system should manage that for us quite nicely. Because we've applied brakes again, we need to reset that auto brake back to max. Really important. Now, detents. As we advance the throttles, we're going to hear a number of clicks. If you want full power for takeoff, you're going to move it right to the top into toga. If you want the D rate that we spoke about earlier, that flex 2 temp, then we're going to move it to flex MCT. And then after takeoff, we should see lever climb flash here. And that will mean that we need to click it back into the CL gate. And that's where the throttles will remain for the rest of the flight until nearly touchdown. With that in mind, let's get into it. So, making sure the brakes are off, we're going to begin to advance the throttles through to 40%. Check the engines, they look good. We're going to advance the throttles until we see flex on the display. And we're accelerating. We're using a bit of rudder to maintain that centre line with the crosswind. 80 knots. V1. Rotate. Slowly back on the stick, and now we look at the flight director and we follow that flight director. Positive rate, gear up. And now we can press AP1 and the autopilot's got the aeroplane. We'll keep watching this now. So the aeroplane should be flying to the little magenta bug. Now it says lever climb, so look at the throttles. We're going to bring them back to that climb gate. The aeroplane's nose drops through the acceleration altitude, and we've already gone through S, so let's get them flaps tidied up. Flaps to 0. When you see the S and the speed bug go past S, get them flaps all turned back to 0. With that, we can disarm the ground spoiler. And now we're climbing away through the departure into a little bit of murky weather, possibly a little bit of rain as well. So, think about icing. We might get a bit of icing here. We'll turn the wing anti-icing on. We're going to monitor all of the systems of the aeroplane throughout our climb to make sure nothing is going wrong. Through 4,000 feet, remember 5,000 is the transition altitude as well, so when we go through 5, we're going to fall down here on standard pressure, and then we should see SDD on the PFD. And now the aeroplane is starting to level off at 5,000 because of the constraints that we spoke about earlier, and because of that it doesn't need all the power for the climb, so the throttles have reduced as well automatically to hold 250 knots below 10,000 feet. Perfect. Turning left at Tabley on the Samba 1 Romeo departure. Lots of rain here today at Manchester. I do like the weather in the sim. So now we can either wind this all the way up to our cruise of 190 and leave it in managed mode with a little circle dot, and it will wait until Samba in 7 miles, and as we pass Samba it will then begin to climb again. Or we can go one further and enter what is called open climb. Now if you're using an ATC client, you might be told climb now flight level 190, and that means we can ignore Samba's 5,000 foot restriction. So we're going to go now into open climb. We're going to press down like so. Because we're through 5,000 feet, that's the transition altitude here, we're going to press down and show standard on the displays, and you'll see now the mode has changed to op climb, open climb. We'll climb now at max rate all the way to flight level 190. Expand the range rings on the display so we can see what is expected further ahead of us. And the only thing left to do now is at 10,000 feet we'll turn the landing lights off and the nose lights and the runway turn off lights, And then once we get through this weather here, if it's safe to do so, we can turn the seatbelt signs off as well. And we'll progress all the way up to cruise. There you have it. Episode 2, pushback, engine start, taxi, takeoff, and climb to cruise in the Latin VFR A320 series for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Hope you found this one useful as well. Hope you're enjoying the product so far. Hit like and subscribe. Share any tips and tricks and thoughts in the comments below. And I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.